The employee finds the millionaire's baby abandoned. I never once imagined that stumbling upon a dying infant amidst the refuse of a London gutter would irrevocably alter the course of my life forever. Jane Miller sprinted through the torrential downpour that was lashing against the cobblestone streets of London that bleak October night. It was 11:30 p.m., and she had just concluded a grueling double-time shift cleaning the high-rise offices in the financial district of Canary Wharf. Her worn-out shoes splashed violently into the murky puddles as she made her desperate way to the bus stop, praying fervently that the last night bus hadn't already rumbled past. The icy wind, carrying the damp chill of the Thames, cut across her face, and the rain pierced through her thin, inadequate jacket. Jane pressed her step, urgency fueling her tired limbs, but something inexplicable made her stop dead in her tracks in front of the small, dimly lit park that was merely 2 blocks from the main avenue. A strange, unsettling sound mingled with the roar of the storm, a faint, almost inaudible cry. "It must be a stray cat," she muttered to herself, her breath visible in the cold air. But something deep within her chest was screaming a denial. She had lost her own baby just 3 months prior, and that sound awakened in her a maternal instinct she had thought was buried along with her son. She walked slowly, hesitantly, towards the overgrown bushes where the crying seemed to originate. Among the wet branches and fallen autumn leaves, she saw something that made her scream in sheer horror. A small, soaked cardboard box, and inside, wrapped in a filthy and sodden blanket, a newborn was crying with a voice that was growing increasingly weak. "Oh my God!" cried Jane, running towards the creature. "Who could have done this?" The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. His skin was bluish from the biting cold, and he was breathing with terrifying difficulty. Jane immediately scooped him into her arms, stripping off her own jacket to wrap him up, shielding him from the relentless elements. "Take it easy, my love," she whispered to him, as her own hot tears mixed with the freezing rain on her face. "You're safe now. Mum is here." The baby was beautiful despite his harrowing condition. He possessed delicate features, fair skin, and a lock of dark hair that peeked out from under the wet blanket. On his little wrist, he wore a gold bracelet with a small, elegant plaque that read AS, the only clues about his identity. Jane looked around in despair, scanning the shadows. The park was completely deserted, and there were no signs of the monster who had abandoned the child. "How could they leave you here to die?" she whispered, cradling him tightly against her chest to share her warmth. Her mind was working at full speed. She knew she should take him to the hospital or call the police, but something stopped her. She remembered the terrible stories she had heard about the foster care system, the babies lost in endless paperwork, the adoptions that never came, and this kid was freezing to death right now. "I'm going to save you first," she decided firmly. "Then we will think about the rest." She ran to her small flat that was 6 blocks away, her heart pounding against her ribs. All the way, the baby cried faintly, and every sound he made awakened in Jane a maternal despair that she had not felt since she lost her own child. Her flat was humble, a single room with a small kitchenette and a bathroom shared with the other tenants of the council estate. But it was clean and warm, and that was exactly what the baby needed. Now, the first thing she did was strip off his wet clothes. The child was soaked and shaking. With expert hands, she had taken care of several babies in her previous job as a nanny. She bathed him with warm water, dried him carefully, and wrapped him in the only clean, fluffy towels she had. "Oh, my beautiful boy," she murmured as she examined him. "You're malnourished and dehydrated. How long have you been out there?" The baby had stopped crying and was looking at her with big, dark eyes that seemed to thank her for saving him from the dark. Jane felt her heart melt in her chest. It was as if she had found a piece of her soul that she thought was lost forever. She didn't have baby formula, but she remembered that her neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, had a grandchild the previous year. She ran out into the hallway and knocked desperately on the door. "Mrs. Higgins! Mrs. Higgins, please!" The woman answered the door in a dressing gown, clearly upset by the commotion. "Jane, what the bloody hell is going on?" "It's almost midnight." "Mrs. Higgins, I need baby formula urgently. You have some left over from when your grandson was little?" Mrs. Higgins frowned at the request. "Formula? Why don't you have—" "Please," Jane interrupted her with tears welling in her eyes. "It's an emergency. I'll explain it to you later." Something in the hopelessness of Jane's voice convinced Mrs. Higgins. She went to rummage through her flat and returned with an almost full tin of formula and some bottles. Here, but you're going to explain to me what's going on tomorrow. I promise you that. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. God is going to bless you for this. Back at her flat, Jane prepared the bottle, following the instructions to the letter. The baby took the milk desperately, as if he had not eaten for hours. While she was feeding him, Jane was talking to him in a low, soothing voice. I don't know who you are, my love, but I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you like I couldn't protect my little Mikey. The memory of her own son hit her like a physical slap in the face. Mikey had been born premature and struggled for 3 days in the hospital before his small lungs could no longer fight. The doctor said there was nothing to do, that sometimes it just happened. But Jane blamed herself every day since then. Maybe God put you in my way, she whispered to the baby who was now falling asleep in her arms. Maybe this is my second chance to be a mother. That night, Jane didn't sleep for a minute. She stayed sitting in the only armchair in her flat, holding the baby, watching every breath, every movement. When the morning dawned, gray and drizzly over London, the child looked better. His color had improved, and he was breathing normally. Good morning, my little angel, she told him when he opened his little eyes. That's what I'm going to call you. Little angel, because you came to me like an angel from heaven. Jane knew she had to make a decision. She could take him to the authorities as was her duty, or she could keep him and give him the maternal love that he clearly had not received from the one who abandoned him. The idea was crazy, illegal even, but when she looked at those innocent eyes, she couldn't imagine handing him over to a system that could fail him. Only for a few days, she convinced herself. Only until he is stronger. I'll see what to do later. But deep in her heart, Jane already knew that she was not going to be able to part with that baby. After months of feeling empty and purposeless, she had finally found a reason to live. While Angelito was sleeping peacefully in her arms, Jane took the small golden bracelet and studied it carefully. Ass, she muttered. What will you mean? Will you be the initials of your dad, your mum? She had no idea that those 2 letters would take her directly into the world of Arthur Sterling, one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. A man who didn't even know he had a son. The storm outside had passed, but the real tempest in Jane's life was just beginning. For the next 2 weeks, Jane lived in a bubble of secret happiness and constant terror. Every morning she woke up with Angelito sleeping next to her in bed, and for a moment she forgot that he wasn't really hers. The little one had flourished under her care. He had gained weight. His skin had a healthy pink color, and his eyes shone with a vivacity that he did not have the night she found him. Look how big you are, my darling, she was telling him while she was changing his nappy in the mornings. You hardly fit in the clothes I made you anymore. Jane had used her meager savings to buy some basic things, nappies plus formula, and had sewn small t-shirts and pajamas with scraps of fabric she got at the market. She couldn't afford to buy new clothes, but every garment was made with infinite love. The biggest challenge was keeping the secret. Jane worked cleaning houses during the day and couldn't leave Angelito alone. At first, she tried to take him with her hidden in a large shopping bag, but it was too risky. The baby could cry at any moment. It was Mrs. Higgins who, without knowing it, gave her the solution. Jane, she told her one morning in the hallway, why didn't you tell me you had family visiting you? I heard a baby crying last night. Jane felt her heart leap out of her chest, but she quickly improvised. He's my little nephew, Mrs. Higgins. My sister had problems with her husband, and she is staying with me for a few days. Oh, poor thing, said Mrs. Higgins with genuine concern. If you need me to take care of him while you work, I can help. My little grandson is all grown up now, and I miss taking care of babies. It was the answer to her prayers. You would seriously do that for me? Of course, love. Between neighbors, we help each other. Also, you don't charge me for full care, just something symbolic for nappies. That's how the perfect routine started. Every morning, Jane lent Angelito to Mrs. Higgins, supposedly so that her sister could look for a job. Mrs. Higgins was delighted to take care of the baby, and Angelito seemed to thrive on the extra attention. This child is a love, Mrs. Higgins told her every afternoon when Jane returned. He hardly cries, eats well, and has such smart eyes. He looks a lot like you. doesn't he? Jane was blushing. It was true that people commented on the resemblance, although she knew it was impossible. Maybe it was the way she carried him or how he looked at her with total trust and love. The bond between them was so strong that it seemed natural, but the lies were starting to get complicated. Jane had had to come up with an elaborate story about her fictional sister, and every day she added more details to maintain consistency. Even worse, she began to receive uncomfortable questions from other people. "And when is your sister coming back for the baby?" the lady in the building asked one afternoon. "Soon," Jane replied evasively. "She's sorting out her papers." "How strange that she didn't come even once to see her son," the woman murmured suspiciously. That night, Jane stayed up worried. How long could she keep up this charade? And most importantly, what would happen when someone started asking more direct questions? Her fears intensified when 2 weeks after the rescue, she started seeing news about a missing baby on the local news. "The Sterling family is offering a reward of £500,000 for information about their missing son," the reporter announced on Mrs. Higgins' television. "The approximately 1-month-old baby disappeared 3 weeks ago under mysterious circumstances." Jane felt her blood run cold. On the screen appeared the photo of a stylish man about 35 years old with features that turned out to be familiar to her. Arthur Sterling, heir to the Sterling business empire, spoke in front of the cameras with obvious pain. "We just want our son back," he said in a broken voice. "If anyone has him, if anyone knows anything, please, he's just an innocent baby." "Oh, what a tragedy," Mrs. Higgins commented, rocking Angelito in her arms. "Imagine losing your child like that. It must be horrible." Jane couldn't take her eyes off the screen. The man's eyes, the shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, everything reminded her of Angelito. And the last name Sterling fit perfectly with the initials AS on the bracelet. Mrs. Higgins said in a trembling voice, "Can I borrow the boy? I think he's hungry." She took Angelito in her arms and ran to her apartment, locking the door. With trembling hands, she took the golden bracelet out of the drawer where she had kept it and examined it again. "Arthur Sterling," she murmured. "You are the son of Arthur Sterling." The baby was looking at her with his big, innocent eyes, oblivious to the storm raging in Jane's heart. She had been taking care of him as if he were her own, but now she realized that somewhere there was a desperate father looking for him. "What am I going to do with you, my love?" she whispered to him with tears in her eyes. "Your dad is looking for you, but I can't let you go." The thought of giving him up terrified her, not only because she had lied for weeks, but because she had genuinely come to love him like her own son. Little Angel was her reason for getting up every morning, her purpose, her joy. Without him, she would go back to being the empty and broken woman she was before she found him. For the next few days, Jane lived in a constant state of anxiety. Every time she went outside, she expected to see missing baby posters with Little Angel's picture. Every time the phone rang or there was a knock on the door, her heart raced thinking that they were coming for him, but at the same time she could not deny that the baby deserved to be with his real family. The Sterlings had resources, money, everything that she could not offer him. They could give him education, opportunities, a bright future. But can they also give him love? She wondered every night as she rocked him to sleep. Are they going to take care of him the way I take care of him? Are you going to know that he likes to be sung to when he is restless? Are they going to know that he smiles when he feels the sun on his face? One afternoon, while walking through the park where she had found him, Jane made a decision that would change everything. She sat down on the same bench from where she had heard the crying that stormy night, dialed the number she had memorized from the news. The phone rang once, twice. "Hello," a male voice replied. "Is this the number to report information about baby Sterling?" she asked in a barely audible voice. "Yes, this is Arthur Sterling speaking. Do you have any information about my son?" Jane closed her eyes. The desperation in that voice was real, palpable. It was the pain of a father who had lost the most precious thing. "I have him," she whispered. The silence on the other side was deafening. "What did you say?" Arthur's voice became intense, urgent. "I found your baby. I've been taking care of him. He's fine, he's healthy." "But where is he? Where are you located?" "I'm on my way there right now." "Wait," Jane said quickly. "I need to explain. It's not what you think. I didn't steal him. I found him abandoned, almost dead. And I don't care, Arthur interrupted her. Just tell me where my son is. Jane gave him the address of the park and hung up the phone with shaking hands. She ran back to her flat, took Angelito in her arms, and kissed him on the forehead. Your dad is coming for you, honey, she whispered to him as tears streamed down her face. Your real dad is going to take you home. But while waiting in the park with the baby in her arms, Jane had no idea that she was about to face the most complicated situation of her life. Because Arthur Sterling wasn't coming alone, and not everyone in his family would be happy to know the truth about how his son had survived. Arthur Sterling arrived at the park in a caravan of 3 black vehicles that looked like they belonged in a movie. Jane watched from the bench as several men in suits came out, followed by a medical team carrying a small stretcher and emergency equipment. Finally, he emerged from the central vehicle. Tall, elegant, dressed in an impeccable gray suit, despite the urgency of the moment. But what struck Jane the most were his eyes. They had the same shape and depth as Angelito's, although they were now filled with a mixture of desperate hope and distrust. Are you the one who called? Arthur asked, cautiously approaching, escorted by 2 bodyguards who assessed every movement of Jane as if it were a threat. Yes, she replied, instinctively pressing Angelito to her chest. The baby stirred slightly but continued to sleep, oblivious to the moment that would change his fate forever. Arthur stopped a few meters away, and Jane saw how his face completely transformed when he recognized the boy. The power lines disappeared, his eyes filled with restrained tears, and for a moment the powerful businessman became simply a father who had found his lost son. Oliver, he whispered, spreading out his trembling arms. My little Oliver. Oliver? Asked Jane, confused. I called him Little Angel. His name is Oliver James Sterling, Arthur said, his voice heavy with emotion. He's my son. One of the doctors approached. Mr. Sterling, we need to examine the baby immediately. After 3 weeks of disappearance, we need to check on his health status. Jane slowly got to her feet, but made no move to hand over the baby. He's perfectly healthy, she said firmly. I've been taking very good care of him. The doctor looked at her with professional skepticism. With all due respect, madam, we need to do a full medical evaluation. Could you give us the child? No, said Jane, surprising herself with the firmness of her refusal. First, I want to explain what happened. You guys don't understand. The only thing I understand, Arthur interrupted, his tone becoming harsher. It's just that you had my son for 3 weeks without reporting him to the authorities. Do you know what we've been through? You have any idea what a hell it's been looking for my own son? I know exactly what it's like to lose a child, Jane replied with an intensity that surprised everyone present, and that's why I saved him. The words floated in the tense air. Arthur studied the face of the woman in front of him, her humble clothes, her hard-working hands, but above all, the protective way she held Oliver and the genuine emotion in her voice. What do you mean you saved him? Asked his slightly less aggressive tone. Jane took a deep breath. I found him right here in this park, abandoned in a cardboard box during a storm. He was almost cold to death, Mr. Sterling. Blue, not breathing well, soaked. If I hadn't found him that night. She stopped, unable to complete the sentence. Arthur visibly turned pale. That's impossible, one of the bodyguards muttered. We checked this park dozens of times during the search because he was not here when you searched, Jane explained. I took him that same night. I've been taking care of him ever since. Dr. Richardson, the Sterling family's personal physician, came closer. Madam, regardless of the circumstances, this baby needs immediate medical attention. He has been out of the healthcare system for weeks. He has been under the best possible care, Jane insisted. Look how good he looks. He looks like an unattended baby. It was true. Oliver looked healthy, well-fed, and was sleeping peacefully in Jane's arms. His skin had a healthy pink color. He had evidently gained weight, and his small features showed the contentment of a well-groomed baby. Arthur took a step closer. Can I see him better? Jane hesitated for a moment, but finally got close enough for Arthur to observe his son closely. When Oliver felt a new presence, he opened his little eyes and looked directly at the man bending over him. Oh my God, Arthur whispered. You're fine. You really are fine. He extended a finger and Oliver, with the natural curiosity of a baby, grabbed it with his little hand. Arthur completely broke down. The tears he had held back for weeks finally flowed freely. "I thought I had lost you forever," he murmured to his son. "I thought I'd never see you again." Jane observed the heartbroken interaction. It was evident that this man genuinely loved the baby, and Oliver seemed to instinctively recognize his biological father. "Mr. Sterling," she said gently, "I need you to understand something. I didn't kidnap your son. I rescued him, and during these weeks, I have been the only mother he has known." Arthur looked up at her, wiping away his tears. "Mother, you are not his mother." "Not biologically," admitted Jane, "but I have been the one who has fed, comforted, cared for him. I have been the one who has woken up with him every night, who knows all his sounds, all his needs." "Madam," Arthur began, realizing that he didn't even know her name. "Jane Miller." "Mrs. Miller, I deeply appreciate that you have taken care of my son, I really do, but now I need to take him home." "To which house?" Jane asked with an intensity that surprised everyone. "Who is he going to be with? Who's going to take care of him?" Arthur frowned at the sign. "With me, I'm obviously his father." "And his mother? Where's the woman who abandoned him?" The silence that followed was telling. Arthur exchanged awkward glances with his employees. "That's a complicated situation," he finally said. "There is nothing complicated about abandoning a baby to die," Jane replied firmly. "She knows that you found him, Mrs. Miller," one of the bodyguards intervened. "These are private family matters that didn't become my business when I found this abandoned baby," Jane interrupted, "and they'll remain my business as long as I'm not sure he's going to be well taken care of." Arthur studied the woman with new attention. There was something in her protective attitude, in the natural way she held Oliver, in how the baby completely relaxed in her arms, that made him reconsider the situation. "Oliver seems very comfortable with you," he observed. "Because I'm all he knows," Jane said. "For him, I am his mum. He understands how traumatic it can be to be abruptly separated from the only mother figure he has ever known." Arthur Richardson nodded involuntarily. "From a medical point of view, she is right. Babies form very strong attachment bonds in the first weeks of life." "What are you suggesting?" Arthur asked. Jane made a decision that would change everything. "I am suggesting that you allow me to continue to take care of him, at least during a gradual transition." "What?" Arthur stepped back. "You can't stay with my son." "I'm not asking to keep him forever," Jane quickly clarified. "I'm asking you to allow me to help with the transition, to get to know my routine with him, to learn what he likes and what puts him at ease, that we don't traumatize him by abruptly separating him from the only caregiver he's ever met." It was a bold, almost impossible proposal. But as Arthur watched as Oliver contentedly curled up against Jane, as she instinctively rocked him when he started to get restless, how she seemed to know his every need, he realized that maybe this woman was right. "I need time to think about it," he finally said. "Time is what Oliver needs too," Jane replied. "Time to get to know his dad without losing the person who has taken care of him." Arthur looked at his son, then at the woman who had saved him, and realized that he was facing the most complicated decision of his life. 3 days after the meeting in the park, Arthur showed up in the humble neighborhood where Jane lived. This time he was coming alone, without the motorcade or the entourage of employees. He drove a discreet silver sedan and wore jeans with a white shirt, trying to look less intimidating. Jane watched him from the window of her flat while he was looking for the right address. Oliver was sleeping in her arms after his morning feed, completely oblivious that his future was being decided meters below. "What will he want now?" murmured Jane, feeling a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. During these 3 days, she had imagined dozens of different scenarios, from Arthur arriving with a court order until he simply disappeared and never came back to look for his son. The doorbell rang softly. Jane came down the stairs carrying Oliver, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," Arthur said, taking off some sunglasses. "Could we talk?" "He came for Oliver," she asked directly, instinctively protecting the baby with her arms. "I came to talk to you, to know the situation." Jane studied him for a moment. His eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. There was something different about his attitude, less aggressive, more human. "It can happen," she finally said, stepping aside. Arthur entered the small flat and immediately noticed the details. The improvised cot made from boxes and cushions, the small homemade toys hanging by threads from the ceiling, the baby clothes carefully washed and folded over the one chair. It was all humble, but obviously done with infinite love. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered without letting go of Oliver. "Please." While Jane was preparing the coffee with one hand, the other always holding the baby, Arthur watched how she moved with absolute naturalness. Every gesture showed practice and affection. When Oliver made a small sound, she immediately adjusted her position and murmured soothing words to him. "How many children have you had?" Arthur asked suddenly. Jane froze with the coffee maker in her hand. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you handle Oliver like you've been taking care of babies all your life." "One," Jane replied after a long pause. "I had one." "Where is he?" "He died." The words came out dry, but as if she had learned to say them without feeling the dagger in her chest every time. Arthur felt as if he had received a slap. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. How was I going to know?" Jane handed him a cup of coffee and sat down in front of him. Oliver curled up against her chest. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right, that's why I'm here." Jane looked at him suspiciously. "For what? To investigate if I am suitable to take care of your child?" "To understand why my son seems to prefer a stranger to his own father." The brutal honesty of the statement surprised them both. Arthur hadn't planned to be so direct, but the frustration of the last few days had broken down his defenses. "I am not a stranger to him," Jane said softly. "I'm the person who saved him when you didn't even know he existed." "What does that mean?" "It means that during the most critical month of his life, I was the one who was there, not you." Arthur felt the accusation as a physical blow. "I didn't know he was born. His mother never told me." "And why didn't you know?" interrupted Jane. "What kind of relationship did you have with the mother of your son that she preferred to abandon him rather than tell you he existed?" "That's none of your business." "It became my business when I found her baby dying in the rubbish." They stared at each other for several seconds. The tension in the small flat was palpable. Oliver, feeling the negative energy, began to get restless in the arms of Jane. "Relax, my love," she whispered to him, rocking automatically. "Mum is here." "You're not his mother," Arthur said with a coldness he didn't really feel. "No." Jane rose abruptly. "Who do you think has woken up with him every night when he cries? Who knows that he likes to have lullabies sung to him under your breath, but that loud noises scare him? Who knows who has a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder?" Arthur blinked. "I didn't know anything about that." "Who knows that he smiles when he feels the breeze on his face, but cries if he is too hot? Who has given him every bottle, changed every nappy, comforted every moment of discomfort for 5 weeks?" "You," Arthur admitted quietly. "Exactly me." Jane sat down again, but her posture was still defensive. "So don't tell me I'm not his mother just because I didn't give birth to him." "But legally speaking," she exploded, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Legally, the woman who abandoned him is also his mother. That makes her a better candidate than me?" Oliver began to cry because of the intensity of the voices. Immediately, Jane lowered the tone and began to rock him, gently singing a lullaby that Arthur did not recognize. But that clearly reassured the baby. "See that?" Arthur said, pointing to the scene. "That's how he should react to me. I'm his father." "Being a father is more than genetics," Jane replied. "It's time, dedication, unconditional love. It's getting to know your child so well that you can anticipate their needs." "I can learn all that." "Yes, in what weather? Between business meetings. You're going to cancel international trips when Oliver has a fever? You're going to get up at 3 in the morning when he's having nightmares?" Arthur felt cornered. "I can hire nannies, the best ones." "Oh, right, more strangers taking care of your child while you go on with your life as if nothing has changed." "My life has completely changed since I found out that I have a son." "Yes, what did it change into? Because as far as I can see, you're still driving the same expensive car, wearing the same fancy clothes, living in the same old world of privilege. What do you want me to become poor to prove that I love my son?" I want you to show me that you understand what it means to be a father, which is not just to give him material things, but to give him time, attention, constant love. Arthur got up abruptly and started walking around the small space. This is ridiculous. You can't give him what I can give him. Education, opportunities, a secure future. And you can give him what I give him, unconditional love, complete dedication, the security of knowing that you will always be the number one priority in someone's life. He is my priority. Is he yours or is he your newest project? Their legal responsibility. Arthur stopped and stared at her. How dare you question my feelings for my own child? I dare because I have seen what happens when children are treated as obligations instead of blessings. I've worked in homes where wealthy parents have children that are raised by nannies while they live out their lives. That's not who I am. Prove it to me. How? Jane took a deep breath, calming Oliver, who had become restless again. Stay here all day today. Take care of Oliver by yourself, without my help, without employees, without anyone else, just you and him. What? If you really want to be his father, you need to know him and he needs to know you, but not as the stranger who appears for a few minutes, but as the person who is going to be there when you are hungry, when you are uncomfortable, when you need to be comforted. Arthur looked at the baby in Jane's arms. Then he looked around the small flat. And what are you going to do? I'm going to work like I do every day to support myself and Oliver. Are you going to leave us alone? Isn't that what you want? Time with your child without interference from me? The proposal terrified Arthur, but also intrigued him. It was an opportunity to prove to both Jane and himself that he could be the father Oliver needed. It's okay, he finally said. I accept. Jane smiled for the first time since he had arrived. So, let's get started. Jane spent the next hour meticulously preparing everything Arthur would need to know to take care of Oliver during the day. She wrote detailed schedules on a sheet of recycled paper. She explained each routine with the patience of an experienced teacher. At 11 a.m. he gets restless, but it's not hunger, she explained while organizing the bottles. It's a dream. If you rock him for 5 minutes in an upright position, he falls asleep without problems. If you try to put him to bed immediately, he will cry for 20 minutes. Arthur was taking mental notes, surprised by the level of detail. How do you know all this? Because I've been watching him and learning from him for 5 weeks, Jane replied, teaching him how to properly fold the homemade nappies she had made by cutting old fabrics. Babies don't come with an instruction manual, but if you pay attention, they teach you what they need. And if he cries, and I don't know what to do, he's going to cry, Jane said naturally. All babies cry. The difference is in how you respond. You panic or you stay calm. You burden him with anxiety or with security. She proved the difference by taking Oliver in her arms in 2 different ways. First, she held him with tense, hurried movements. Oliver immediately became restless. Then she took him with slow, confident movements, talking to him in a low voice. The baby completely relaxed. Babies feel everything we feel, she explained. If you're nervous, he's going to be nervous. At 8 in the morning, Jane put on her only clean jacket and took the bag where she carried her cleaning implements. I'm leaving. I'll be back at 6 p.m. Where exactly are you going? Arthur asked, feeling a surge of panic. To clean offices. It's what I do for a living, Jane replied with a slight wry smile. Not all of us have companies that manage alone. She approached Oliver, who was awake in Arthur's arms, and kissed him on the forehead. Be nice to your dad, my love. Mum will be back soon. And she left Arthur alone with his son for the first time in his life. The first 30 minutes were deceptively easy. Oliver was happy, looking curiously at the man who was carrying him with evident nervousness. Arthur took the opportunity to really observe his son. Every eyelash, every expression, every little sound he made. You're perfect, he murmured to him. I can't believe you're mine. But at 9 o'clock, exactly as Jane had predicted, Oliver began to get restless. Arthur remembered the instructions. It's not hunger yet. Check if you need a nappy change. She put Oliver on the small table that Jane used to change him, and with trembling hands untied knots from the cloth nappy. The process that he had seen Jane do with absolute naturalness would turn into a 15-minute odyssey. Oliver cried during the whole change, not because anything hurt, but because Arthur was clearly nervous and clumsy. "Relax, Oliver," he murmured, carefully cleaning up as he had seen Jane do. "Dad is learning." When he finally managed to put the clean nappy on him, Oliver had escalated to more intense crying. Arthur carried him, trying to remember the exact position Jane was using, but his movements were still unsure. "What do you want?" he asked in despair. "Are you hungry, sleepy? Does anything hurt?" He prepared a bottle following the measures that Jane had written down, but Oliver refused the milk by turning his head away. The crying intensified. Arthur started walking around the small flat, rocking Oliver, but the baby wouldn't calm down. He tried different positions, different rocking rhythms. He even tried to sing a song he remembered from his own childhood, but nothing worked. After 40 minutes of continuous crying, Arthur was sweating and on the verge of panic. He picked up his phone to call Jane, but stopped. This was exactly the test she had given him. She could take care of her own child without outside help. He remembered the words of Jane, "Babies feel everything we feel." He forced himself to take a deep breath, sat down on the only chair in the flat, and completely changed his attitude. "It's okay, Oliver," he said in a calmer voice. "I'm right here with you. I don't know exactly what you need, but let's find out together." He began to systematically check every possibility. Nappy, clean, hungry. He had refused the bottle. Awkward position. He tried different ways of carrying it. That's when he noticed that Oliver had a little fluff stuck to his little finger, so small that it was barely visible. He carefully withdrew it, and to his surprise, the crying immediately subsided. "Was that it?" he murmured in amazement. "Some fluff had you upset." Oliver did not stop crying completely, but the tone changed. Arthur realized that now it was a cry of sleep, not of discomfort. He recalled the specific instructions of Jane. Vertical position, gentle rocking, 5 minutes. With patience that he didn't know he had, Arthur rocked Oliver exactly as Jane had taught, and it worked. In less than 5 minutes, his son fell fast asleep. The rest of the morning passed more quietly. Arthur took the opportunity while Oliver was sleeping to really observe Jane's flat. The details that he had not noticed before now jumped out at him. The small improvements she had made to accommodate the baby, the improvised toys, but full of creativity, the way every inch of the space had been optimized for Oliver's needs. In a small notebook, he found detailed notes that Jane had been making: eating schedules, sleep patterns, reactions to different stimuli. It was like a scientific study of his child's behavior. November 3rd, Oliver smiled for the first time when he heard classical music on Mrs. Higgins's radio. November 5th, he doesn't like it when it's too bright during the afternoon nap. November 8th, he recognizes my voice from the hallway before I enter the flat. Page after page of careful observations, of documented love from a woman who had turned caring for a found baby into a science of the heart. When Oliver woke up for his midday meal, Arthur felt more confident. This time he managed the nappy change in record time. He prepared the bottle with safer movements, and Oliver accepted the milk without resistance. "We're getting better, aren't we?" he told him while Oliver was eating. "We are both learning." The afternoon brought new challenges. Oliver had an episode of colic that Arthur didn't know how to handle. The baby cried inconsolably for an hour, shrinking his little legs against his stomach. Arthur tried all the techniques he remembered seeing Jane use, but nothing worked. He was about to call Dr. Richardson when he remembered something he had seen Jane do. Gentle massages on Oliver's belly and circular movements. Very carefully, he put the baby on his back and began massaging his tummy with the tips of his fingers. To his relief, Oliver gradually began to calm down. It wasn't immediate like when Jane was doing it, but it worked. "Your mom knows what she's doing," he murmured to Oliver. "I need to learn from her." It was the first time he referred to Jane as a mum without internal resistance. When Jane returned at 6 p.m., she found Arthur sitting on the floor with Oliver lying on a blanket, the two staring at each other as if they were having a silent conversation. "How did it go?" she asked, evidently surprised to find the scene so peaceful. "We survived," Arthur replied with a tired smile. "Barely, but we survived." Oliver, upon hearing Jane's voice, immediately began to babble and move his little arms in her direction. She carried him and he snuggled against her chest with the contentment of a baby who finds his safe place again. I missed him terribly, admitted Jane, kissing Oliver's little head. He missed you too, Arthur said, but I think he started to get used to me too. What did you learn today? Arthur got up from the floor, knees protesting from hours of sitting in awkward positions. I learned that being a father is much more difficult than I imagined, and that you are an extraordinary mother. It was the first time he had openly acknowledged Jane's motherhood, and they both felt the weight of those words. The following week, he established a strange but functional routine. Arthur arrived every morning at 8 o'clock. Jane was giving him the instructions for the day, and he would stay and take care of Oliver while she worked. At first, these transitions were tense and formal, but gradually they became more natural. He doesn't scream anymore when he sees that I'm leaving, Jane observed one morning, watching Oliver remain calm in Arthur's arms. He's starting to trust me, Arthur replied with obvious pride. Yesterday, I managed to get him to sleep the whole nap without crying. He used the foot massage technique? Yes, it works like magic. It was Friday afternoon when everything changed. Jane returned from work earlier than usual to find Arthur sitting on the floor with Oliver asleep on his chest, quietly reading the little book of children's stories that she had bought at the flea market. And the duckling finally found his family, Arthur was reading in a soft voice, and they lived happily ever after. Jane stood at the door watching the scene. There was something deeply emotional about seeing this powerful man reduced to the most basic tenderness, whispering tales to a sleeping baby. I didn't know you had arrived, Arthur said, when he noticed her presence. I finished early, Jane replied, carefully sitting down on the chair so as not to wake Oliver. Do you like that story? I think so. He fell asleep halfway through. It's his favorite. Well, I think it's his favorite. He always calms down when I read it to him. Arthur studied the face of Jane. During these weeks, she had learned to read his expressions, and something in his eyes told her that there was more behind those words. She was reading it to her other son? Jane hesitated. For weeks, she had avoided talking about Mikey, but something in the intimate atmosphere of the moment made her lower her defenses. Mikey never reached the end of stories, she said. Finally, he died 3 days after birth. Arthur felt the air thicken. What happened? Jane got up and walked to the small window that overlooked the inner courtyard of the building. He was born premature at 28 weeks. I was working late cleaning offices, carrying heavy equipment, breathing cleaning chemicals. The doctor said that may have contributed. He can't blame himself for that. I can't, she turned to him with sparkling eyes. I knew I was pregnant. I knew I should take better care of myself, but I needed the money. Mikey's dad disappeared when he found out I was pregnant, and I didn't have anyone else. Arthur carefully adjusted his position so that Oliver could continue sleeping comfortably, but he did not take his eyes off Jane. What was the name of Mikey's dad? Frank Reynolds, a construction supervisor I met when I was cleaning the offices of his company. The voice of Jane turned bitter. He told me that he loved me, that we were going to start a family. When I told him I was pregnant, he yelled at me that I was a liar trying to catch him. She never saw him again. Once in the hospital, after Mikey died, he arrived drunk, saying that it was my fault, that women like me didn't know how to take care of children. Jane, she wiped away a tear that had escaped. The security guards had to take him out. Arthur felt a deep anger towards a man he did not know. And then I sank. For months I couldn't work, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't function. I lost my flat, I had to move here. Mrs. Higgins was the one who helped me get cleaning jobs again. That's why you reacted like that when you found Oliver. Jane nodded slowly. When I saw him abandoned there, dying of cold, it was as if Mikey was giving me a second chance, as if God was telling me, this time you can save him. She sat down again, but now on the edge of the bed, closer to where Arthur was with Oliver. Do you know what the worst thing was about losing Mikey? That I could never prove that I would have been a good mother. He died before I could learn his needs, before I could protect him. I really was left with all these desires to love, to care, to be a mother, but with no one to give them to. Arthur watched as her eyes fell on Oliver with a mixture of love and pain that he finally fully understood. And then you found Oliver. And then I found the opportunity to be the mother I could never be with Mikey. Jane reached out a hand and gently stroked Oliver's hair. With him, I was able to show that I did know how to take care, that I could be a good mother. You are an exceptional mother, Arthur said with a conviction that surprised him. What you've done with Oliver is extraordinary. But it's not mine, Jane whispered. And every day that passes, I know that the time is coming when he's going to have to leave with me. And if he didn't have to leave? Jane looked at him confused. What do you mean? Arthur took a deep breath. For the past few weeks, an idea had been forming in his mind, an idea that would have been unthinkable a month ago. I mean, maybe we could find a way for Oliver not to lose either of us. I do not understand. How would you like it? How would you like to come to work for me as Oliver's nanny, officially? Jane blinked several times, processing the proposal. As your employee? As the primary caregiver of my son, with a living wage, medical benefits, a place to live near Oliver? Why would you do that? Arthur looked at the sleeping baby on his chest, then at the woman who had saved and loved him as if he were her own. Because during these weeks I have learned that being a biological father does not automatically give me the right to separate Oliver from the only mother he has ever known. Because I have seen what you two have together, and it would be cruel to destroy that. But I'm just a maid. I have no formal education, no fancy references. You have something better than that, Arthur interrupted. You have unconditional love for my son. You have real experience taking care of him, and you have something that I am still learning. The instinct to put Oliver's needs before your own. Jane was silent for several minutes, looking alternately at Arthur and Oliver. And what would happen when you find a wife, when you start your own family? Where would I be in that story? The question touched on a point that Arthur had been avoiding thinking about. I don't know, he admitted honestly, but I do know that Oliver needs stability now. He needs the people he loves and who love him. We'll have time to figure out the future when it comes. Your parents would agree with this? Your family? Arthur made a face. My family's complicated, but Oliver is my son, and I make the decisions about his care. And the biological mother is going to show up one day demanding rights. Camilla gave up all her rights when she left him, Arthur said with a hardness that he had not shown before. Legally, it's out of the equation. Camilla Harrington, the woman who was with me and never told me she was pregnant. Jane nodded slowly. For weeks, she had imagined the woman who had abandoned Oliver, creating different versions in her mind. She had a name now, but that only made the betrayal more real. I loved her. Arthur considered the question carefully. I thought so, but someone she loves doesn't abandon an innocent baby to die. And me? Jane asked with a vulnerability that surprised her. How do you feel about me? The question floated between them like something tangible. Arthur looked at this woman who had transformed his understanding of fatherhood, of sacrifice, of unconditional love. Respect, he finally said. Admiration, deep gratitude, and something else that I'm still trying to understand. Oliver stirred in his arms, opening his eyes slowly. When he saw Jane, he immediately extended his arms towards her. Hello, my love, she whispered to him, taking him in her arms. Did you sleep well with Dad? And at that moment, Arthur realized that the word family could mean much more than he had imagined. Arthur's decision to hire Jane as Oliver's official nanny unleashed a family storm that he had not anticipated. It all started when he took them both to see the Sterling Mansion, an imposing residence in Mayfair where his parents lived. Edward and Penelope Sterling. This is the woman who found Oliver? Penelope asked when Arthur arrived with Jane and the baby one Sunday afternoon. The elegant 60-year-old studied Jane from head to toe with a look that evaluated every detail. The simple but clean clothes, the worked hands, the slightly uncomfortable posture in the luxurious atmosphere. Mother, I present to you Jane Miller, Arthur said, immediately feeling the tension in the air. She is the one who has been taking care of Oliver all these weeks. Nice to meet you, Jane said with a respectful bow, carrying Oliver, who was curiously looking at the huge crystal chandeliers. Penelope did not return the greeting. Arthur, can we talk in private? Jane can listen to what you have to say. No, he can't. Penelope's voice had that authoritative tone that Arthur remembered from his childhood. Higgins, take the lady to the kitchen and give her something to drink. We'll talk in the study. It was an order, not a suggestion. Jane looked at Arthur with eyes that asked for her guidance. Go to the kitchen, he told her gently. We will meet in a few minutes. While Jane was leaving with the family's maid, Penelope closed the study door with a thud. What are you thinking, Arthur? In giving my son the best possible care. The best care? An uneducated maid, it is the best care you can get for the heir of the Sterlings. Edward Sterling, a 70-year-old man with an imposing presence, got up from his desk. Your mother is right, son. This situation is completely out of control. What situation? A woman saved my son's life and has taken exceptionally good care of him. A woman who hid our grandson for weeks, Penelope replied. A woman we know nothing about his past, his motivations, his mental stability. I know everything I need to know. She is an extraordinary mother. She's nobody's mother, Penelope exploded. She's a stranger who took advantage of an abandoned baby. Don't you realize how strange all this is? Arthur felt his blood boil. The strange thing was that my son almost died abandoned. The extraordinary thing is that someone saved him without expecting anything in return. Edward approached his son. Arthur, we understand your gratitude to this woman. It's natural, but hiring someone like that as a head nanny is a hasty decision. Why? Because she doesn't have a university degree? Because she doesn't come from a well-known family? Because you don't know her true story, Penelope said curtly. You researched her past, checked her references. Do you know why a woman her age is lonely without a family of her own? I know she lost her own son. Didn't she tell you that? Penelope exchanged a meaningful glance with Edward. What if she's lying? And if there are reasons why she lost that son, what are you implying? I'm saying that women who become obsessed with other people's children often have complicated histories. Depression, instability, even neglect. Arthur turned livid. Don't you dare suggest that Jane would be capable of hurting Oliver. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm saying you don't know anything for sure. At that moment, the door opened and the maid entered, carrying a tray of tea. Excuse the interruption, she said nervously, but the baby is crying and the lady can't calm him down. He says he needs his Mrs. Jane. Penelope smiled with bitter satisfaction. Come, he can't even handle the child without that woman's presence. That's not normal. Arthur came out of the study and found Jane walking around the huge living room, rocking Oliver, who was crying inconsolably. Several employees of the house were watching her with poorly disguised curiosity. What happened? Arthur asked, taking Oliver, but the baby kept crying. I don't know, answered worried Jane. He was calm, but when that lady pointed out to the maid that he had returned after serving tea, I offered to carry him, the maid explained. I thought she would like to meet someone else, but she started crying and hasn't stopped. Jane extended her arms, and Oliver immediately calmed down when he returned to her. The change was so dramatic that everyone present fell silent. This is not normal, Penelope murmured from the study door. Of course it's not normal, replied Jane, turning to her with a firmness that surprised everyone. It's not normal for a baby to have to be in a place full of strangers. It is not normal to separate him from the only person he knows and trusts. Strangers? Penelope approached with measured steps. Young lady, we are this child's family. Being a blood family does not automatically mean that he knows you or feels safe with you. Jane answered without lowering her gaze. Oliver needs time to adapt. He needs routine. He needs stability. And can you give him that? Penelope's voice was dangerously soft. I've been giving it to him for 6 weeks in a one-bedroom flat, in a poor neighborhood. In a home full of love, the silence that followed was tense. Penelope assessed Jane with new attention, realizing that she had underestimated this woman's determination. Arthur maid said without taking her hopeful eyes off, you need to understand the implications of what you are proposing. This woman is not just an employee, it has an excessive influence on your child. She has the influence of a mother, Arthur corrected. Exactly. Penelope turned to her son. Don't you see how problematic that is? He is creating a bond that goes beyond the professional. She is replacing the real mother. The real mother abandoned Oliver to die. She said Jane with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. I saved him, and we already thanked him for his intervention, replied Edward, appearing in the living room. but that does not give him permanent rights over the child. I'm not asking for rights, Jane said, gently rocking Oliver, who had begun to get restless again. I'm asking for consideration for what's best for him. And what is better for him? Penelope asked sarcastically. Emotional stability, constant care, unconditional love, not being treated as an object that is passed from hand to hand according to family conveniences. Family conveniences? Edward stiffened. Miss, you're forgetting who you're talking to. I'm talking to people who want to separate a baby from the only maternal figure he's ever known, without considering the trauma that can cause him. Arthur watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. Jane was not intimidated by her parents. She was defending Oliver with the ferocity of a real mother, but she was also winning herself over. Powerful enemies. Jane, he said gently, maybe we should... Arthur, Penelope interrupted, let her speak. I want to hear exactly what this woman thinks about our family. Jane took a deep breath, aware that she was in dangerous territory, but unable to back down when it came to Oliver's well-being. I think you guys love Oliver, but you don't know him. I think they want the best for him, but they are defining the best in terms of money and social status instead of love and emotional stability. And you can give him love and emotional stability? Edward asked. I've been giving them to him. Until when? Penelope came closer. What happens when she gets married? When she has her own family? What happens when she gets tired of playing mummy with someone else's kid? That's never going to happen. How can she be so sure? Jane looked at Oliver, then at Arthur, and finally at the parents who were looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Because I already lost a child once, she said in a broken but firm voice, and I'm not going to abandon someone else. The words fell like bombs in the elegant living room. Penelope and Edward exchanged alarmed glances. Did you forgive? Penelope asked. How did he lose it? That, Arthur firmly intervened, it is personal information that does not belong to them. If she is going to take care of our grandson, everything belongs to us, replied Edward. The tension reached a breaking point. Oliver, feeling the intense emotions of the adults, began to cry again. Jane calmed him down instinctively, but the division in the room was palpable. I think we should go, Arthur finally said. Yes, agreed Penelope with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I think it would be the best. As they were heading towards the exit, Penelope took her partner by the arm. Arthur, that woman is not going to fit into our world, and if you insist on this path, you are going to have to choose between her and your family. Arthur looked at his parents, then at Jane, who was waiting at the door with Oliver in her arms, and realized that the war was just beginning. 2 weeks after the disastrous encounter at the Sterling mansion, the family pressure had intensified dramatically. Penelope had discreetly hired a private investigation agency to dig into Jane's past, while Edward exerted pressure on Arthur through the family business. Son, you need to reconsider this situation, Edward told him during an executive meeting. Shareholders are starting to ask questions about your personal stability. A CEO who cannot properly manage his private life generates concern among investors. Arthur had resisted all the pressures, but the emotional toll was evident. Visits to Jane's house had become his only refuge, the only place where he could simply be a father learning to love his son. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Arthur arrived as usual at 6, but found Jane nervously pacing the small flat with Oliver in her arms. What's the matter? He asked immediately, noticing the concern on her face. Oliver has been strange since this morning, Jane replied, her voice heavy with anxiety. He hasn't eaten well, he's hotter than usual, and he has that different creep. Arthur reached over and touched his son's forehead. Yes, he was warm, but it didn't look like a high fever. You took his temperature? I don't have a thermometer, admitted Jane, embarrassed. I have been measuring by touch, as my grandmother taught me. It was one of those differences between their worlds that became apparent at times like these. Arthur immediately picked up his phone. Dr. Richardson, I'm Arthur Sterling. Can you come and check on Oliver? Jane says he's acting strange. Of course, Mr. Sterling. I'll be there in 30 minutes. While waiting for the doctor, Oliver became visibly worse. His crying became sharper. He began to completely refuse the bottle and develop slightly accelerated breathing. Something is very wrong, Jane murmured, rocking Oliver, who was not consoling himself with any of his usual techniques. I've never seen him like this before. When Dr. Richardson arrived, he carefully examined Oliver with the medical equipment he always carried for emergencies. He has a fever of 38.5 Gay, he announced after several minutes. Breathing slightly elevated, but the lungs sound clear. Have you had contact with someone sick recently? Only with me and Arthur, answered Jane, and with Mrs. Higgins when I visit her. Any changes in routine, different diet, new environments? Arthur and Jane exchanged glances. The visit to the mansion had been 2 weeks ago, too long to do the direct cause. Doctor, said Jane excitedly, there is something else. Your bowel movements have changed color. They are paler, almost grayish. Dr. Richardson frowned and asked to examine the most recent nappy. His expression became serious. I need to do some blood tests immediately. These stools could indicate a liver problem. Liver problem? Arthur felt the world was shaking. What kind of problem? It could be anything from a viral infection to something more serious. We can't know without full analysis. They took Oliver to the private hospital where Dr. Richardson had privileges. Over the next 4 hours, a battery of doctors examined the baby as lab results gradually came in. Oliver cried constantly, refusing all consolation. The nurses tried to calm him down without success. Arthur tried to rock him, but the baby was arching in his arms, clearly uncomfortable. Let me try, Jane said, extending her arms. The moment Oliver felt the familiar contact, his crying subsided to a soft moan. He was still uncomfortable, but at least he calmed down enough so that the doctors could work more effectively. That's remarkable, one of the nurses murmured. We've been trying to calm him down for hours. At 10 p.m., Dr. Richardson returned with the results in a face that did not bode well for good news. The tests show a viral liver infection, he announced. It is not immediately dangerous, but requires specialized treatment and constant monitoring. What does that mean? Arthur asked. It means that Oliver needs to be hospitalized for at least a week, possibly 2. We will need to give him specific medications and monitor his liver function every few hours. Is he going to be okay? The voice of Jane, it cracked slightly. With the right treatment, most babies make a full recovery, but it's critical that we follow medical protocol. Exactly. Dr. Richardson paused and studied both parents. There's another thing. Oliver is clearly stressed by the illness, and stress can significantly complicate recovery. He is going to need constant presence of the people with whom he feels safest. I'm staying, Arthur and Jane said at the same time. You can both stay, but I want you to understand something important. Sick babies often emotionally return to their deepest attachment bonds. Oliver is going to need emotional stability as much as medical treatment. That first night in the hospital was a painful revelation. Oliver, connected to monitors and with an intravenous line in his arm, cried inconsolably every time Jane moved more than a few meters away. Can you stay by the cot? The night nurse finally asked. Her presence is the only natural sedative that is working. Jane spent the night sitting by the cot with one hand always touching Oliver, whispering lullabies and words of tranquility to him. Arthur stayed in a chair on the other side, observing how his presence, although important, did not have the same calming effect. On the second day, when the doctors tried to perform a minor procedure to obtain another blood sample, Oliver became hysterical. He was screaming with an intensity that alarmed the entire medical staff. We can't work with him like that, the lab technician said in frustration. You need to be calmer, or the procedure could be dangerous. Jane asked for permission to carry Oliver during the procedure. With him curled up against her chest, singing softly in his ear, the doctors managed to get the sample without complications. How does she do that? One of the resident doctors asked in amazement. I know him, replied Jane. I just know what calms him down. But it was on the third day that the situation became critical in a way that no one had anticipated. Penelope and Edward showed up at the hospital unannounced, accompanied by a lawyer and a private pediatrician. Arthur, Penelope announced, we have come to take care of Oliver's medical situation. What does that mean? Edward approached with documents in his hand. It means we've hired Dr. Henderson, one of the best pediatricians in the country, to oversee our grandson's treatment. Dr. Henderson, an older man with an air of absolute authority, immediately began to question the established protocol. Why hasn't the baby been moved to a private room? Why is this woman constantly glued to the cot? This is not standard medical procedure because it works, Dr. Richardson replied firmly. The emotional state of the baby is critical for his recovery. The emotional state is managed with appropriate sedation, not with excessive attachment to non-medical personnel. The tension exploded when Dr. Henderson ordered Jane to stay away from Oliver so that he could perform his own evaluation. The moment she pulled away, Oliver started crying with an intensity that made the monitors go off. Her heart rate is rising dangerously, a nurse has alerted. It's just temporary anxiety, insisted Dr. Henderson, trying to examine Oliver, who was writhing desperately. Doctor, you need to stop, Dr. Richardson interjected. His stress is affecting his recovery. I will not allow a medical treatment to be dictated by a baby's emotions, Henderson replied. That's when Jane made the decision that would change everything. She walked firmly to the cot, ignoring Dr. Henderson's protests. If they want Oliver to recover, she said with an authority that surprised everyone, they're going to have to decide what's more important, their medical pride or this baby's health. She took Oliver in her arms, and immediately he calmed down. The monitors returned to normal levels. Vino, she went straight to Penelope and Edward. This is not manipulation. This is not theater. This is a sick baby who needs to feel safe in order to heal. Penelope looked at the monitors, then at her quiet grandson in Jane's arms, and for the first time since she had known this woman, she did not have an immediate response. What are you suggesting? Asked Edward. I'm suggesting that you stop treating me like I'm the problem and start seeing me as part of the solution. It was the moment of truth, and everyone in that hospital room knew that the decision they made would define not only Oliver's recovery, but the future of this non-traditional family that was struggling to form. The silence in the hospital room extended for several minutes after the Jane challenge. Oliver slept peacefully in her arms while the monitors showed stable vital signs. Penelope looked at the numbers on the screens, then at her grandson, and finally at the woman who had proved to be indispensable for his well-being. Dr. Richardson, Penelope finally said, her voice noticeably softer, what is your professional medical opinion on this situation? The doctor adjusted his glasses before answering. Mrs. Sterling, in 30 years of pediatrics, I have never seen such a pronounced attachment bond between a caregiver and a baby. The data is unambiguous. The presence of Mrs. Miller has a measurable and positive effect on Oliver's recovery. But medically speaking, Dr. Henderson chimed in, this creates an unhealthy dependency. With respect, Dr. Henderson, Dr. Richardson replied, the unhealthy thing would be to ignore what is clearly working in favor of protocols that are not yielding results. Edward went to the window overlooking the hospital garden. What are you recommending then, doctor? I am recommending that you acknowledge the obvious. This woman is not only a caregiver for Oliver, she is his primary attachment figure. Separating him from her, especially while he is ill, could cause lasting psychological trauma. Arthur, who had been watching the exchange, approached his parents. Mother, father, you need to see this for what it is. It's not about social status or family protocol. It's about what's best for Oliver. And what exactly are you proposing? Penelope asked. I propose that we stop fighting against something that is good for my son, Arthur replied with a firmness that he had been developing for weeks. I hope we find a way to make this work for everyone. Jane looked up. During this whole conversation, she had remained focused on Oliver, but now she paid full attention. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Arthur said, taking a deep breath, that I want to offer you more than just a job as a nanny. What? Arthur came over and sat down in the chair next to the hospital bed. Jane, during these weeks I have learned more about being a father than I have learned in my entire previous life. You have taught me that a family is not defined by birth certificates or marriage contracts. It is defined by love, commitment, and mutual dedication. Penelope and Edward exchanged alarmed glances, intuiting where the conversation was heading. Arthur, warned Penelope, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I want Jane to be an official part of our family, not as an employee, not as a hired nanny, but as Oliver's joint guardian. The term floated in the air as something revolutionary. In a society where traditional family structures were the norm, the idea of a shared motherhood between an absent biological mother and a present-hearted mother was almost unthinkable. Joint guardian, repeated Edward. Son, that doesn't exist legally. So we created a new legal framework, Arthur replied. Adoption by a second mother. Shared guardianship, whatever it takes. Jane felt her heart racing. Arthur, are you sure about what you're saying? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He turned to his parents. Father, you wanted Oliver to have the best opportunities, the best education, the best future. It doesn't include that having a mother who loves him unconditionally, but the social implications, Penelope began. What are the implications? He interrupted Jane with a new determination. That Oliver will grow up knowing that love is more important than money, that he will understand that families can be formed in many different ways. The implications, Edward said carefully, are that our family is going to be the center of social speculation. The media, commercial competitors, society in general. And, Arthur asked, do you prefer social approval over the happiness of your grandson? At that moment, Oliver woke up and looked around the room. His eyes rested on each face, but when he saw Penelope, instead of the usual fear, he showed a calm curiosity. It was as if he felt that the tension had changed, that the adults around him had come to a new understanding. Penelope approached slowly. May I? Jane hesitated for a moment. Then she nodded. Talk to him gently. He does not like sudden movements when he is waking up. Penelope extended a finger towards Oliver, who after a moment of evaluation grabbed it with his little hand. It was the first positive interaction between grandmother and grandson. Hi, Oliver, Penelope murmured. I'm your grandmother. He sees how natural it is when there is no conflict in the environment, Jane observed. Babies feel everything. How exactly would it work? Edward asked, evidently beginning to consider the proposal. This comaternity. Arthur stood up. Jane would move into the family home. She would have her own suite of rooms, but she would be available to Oliver 24 hours a day. She would participate in all important decisions about his upbringing. Education, health, and economically, Penelope asked, always practical. She would be part of the family, Arthur replied firmly, with all the security and benefits that implies. Jane felt her head spinning. Arthur, this is much more than I ever imagined. Is this something you would like? He asked. Jane looked at Oliver, who was now playing with her grandmother's fingers, then at Arthur, and finally at the parents who were watching her with a mixture of resignation and genuine curiosity. Yes, she said finally. Yes, that's what I want, but I have conditions. What conditions? Edward asked. First, I'm not going to be treated as an employee in disguise. If I'm going to be Oliver's joint guardian, my opinions about his upbringing will have the same weight as Arthur's. I agree, Arthur said immediately. Secondly, I want Oliver to know the truth about how he came into our lives. When he is old enough, I want him to know that he was found, saved and loved by a family that chose to be formed from the heart, not from obligation. Penelope and Edward looked at each other. It was a condition that required humility on her part, to acknowledge that her grandson had been abandoned and rescued by a working-class woman. That can be tricky to explain, Penelope murmured. The truth is always better than pretty lies, replied Jane. Oliver deserves to know his real story. And the third condition? Asked Edward. I want to establish an educational fund for abandoned children in hospitals and orphanages. I want Oliver's story to help other babies who are not lucky enough to be found by someone who loves them. It was a condition that transformed her personal story into something bigger, a legacy of compassion that would extend beyond her family. Arthur smiled. I think we can do that. Penelope watched Jane with new consideration. You know what, Miss Miller? Maybe I underestimated your motivations. What are you saying? I mean, a woman interested in money would have accepted any offer without conditions. A true mother makes demands that benefit the child and other children. It was the first real recognition of the maternal role of Jane by Penelope. So, Edward said, I guess we have to plan a very unconventional transition. Does that mean they agree? Jane asked, barely daring to believe what she was hearing. It means, Penelope replied, that we are going to try something that no Sterling family has tried before. Let's prioritize the happiness of the baby over social conventions. Oliver, as if he understood the importance of the moment, let out a cheerful little sound that made all the adults in the room smile. I believe, De Richardson said from the doorway where he had been discreetly observing, that this baby is going to grow up in the most loving environment I have seen in my medical career. The decision was made, but now came the most difficult part, making it work in the real world. 6 months after that decision, that changed their lives forever. The Sterling mansion had been transformed not only physically, but in its very essence. The suite they had prepared for Jane on the second floor had become the emotional heart of the house, where they naturally gathered during the afternoons to watch Oliver play on the colorful blankets that she had knitted during the evenings. "Remember when you said Oliver would never feel comfortable here?" Arthur asked Jane one spring afternoon while they were watching their son. It was already clear to them that he was their son, crawling around the garden under Penelope's loving supervision. "I remember I said it would take time," Jane corrected with a smile. And he was right. It was true, the transition had not been immediate or easy. The first months were full of adjustments, cultural misunderstandings, and moments where the differences between their worlds seemed insurmountable. But something extraordinary had emerged from that tension. A hybrid family that worked precisely because they had had to consciously build each of their dynamics. "Jane," called Penelope from the garden, "Oliver is trying to eat the flowers again." "I'm coming," Jane replied, getting up to intervene. But Penelope stopped her with a gesture. No, I've already learned the distraction technique you taught me." "Look." Penelope approached Oliver with a small musical toy, immediately capturing his attention and drawing him away from the begonias that he had been exploring with obvious intention, culinary. "Your mother is learning," Arthur observed with a smile. "Our mother," corrected Jane automatically. It was a little reminder of how they had completely redefined family roles. Penelope was no longer just the grandmother. She had become a second maternal figure for Jane, teaching her about family finances, social protocol, and navigating the high society world. Juan, in turn, had taught Penelope about patience, creativity in parenting, and the beauty of simplicity. Edward emerged from his study with a folder in his hands. "Jane, the final documents of the educational fund have arrived. Officially, the Oliver Sterling Miller Foundation is ready to start operations." The fund had been one of the most successful and rewarding initiatives of the entire process. Within 6 months, they had established a program that not only provided resources for abandoned babies, but also trained hospital staff in emotional care techniques for children without a family. "How many hospitals confirmed participation?" Jane asked, taking the documents. 15 in the city, and we have requests from 8 more cities," Edward replied with obvious pride. "Your idea is spreading faster than we anticipated." "It's not my idea," Jane said. "It is Oliver's story turned into help for other children." Arthur watched the exchange with the satisfaction of seeing how the two aspects of his life had been perfectly integrated. Jane had brought social purpose to the family business, while Sterling Resources had amplified the impact of Jane's compassion. "Did you know," she told Jane later that night, as they put Oliver to sleep in the elegant nursery they had designed together, "that you're the first person to make my dad excited by talking about corporate social responsibility? Your father is a good man who simply needed to find the right cause," Jane replied, adjusting Oliver's little blanket. "We all need purpose, Arthur. And what is your purpose now?" Jane sat down in the rocking chair that had been placed next to the cot, the same rocking chair where she had spent countless hours comforting Oliver during his first weeks of life. "My purpose is simple," she said, watching Oliver sleep peacefully. "It is to make sure that this child grows up knowing that love can come in many forms, that families are built with conscious decisions, and that his story, however complicated it may be, is beautiful precisely because it shows that fate can be altered by compassion." "Do you think he will understand all this when he is older?" "I think he's going to understand that he was loved from the moment someone decided to save him, and that love multiplied instead of dividing when more people decided to protect him." Arthur came up and took her hand. During these months, their relationship had evolved into something that neither of them had anticipated. It was not a traditional romance. They were both too focused on being parents for Oliver, but it was a deep partnership, an emotional intimacy built around their shared love for the child that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "To have taken that phone call? To have made your life so complicated?" Jane smiled. "You mean that's how I regret calling you to give your son back to you? I mean, if you regret having lost the simplicity of your previous life." "Arthur," she said, getting up to check one last time that Oliver was comfortable, "I had no previous life. I had existence. I was an empty woman working to survive, carrying a pain that I thought would never heal." She turned to him. Oliver gave me back the ability to be a mother. You gave me back the chance to be part of a family. Your family gave me back the opportunity to make an impact in the world. How could I regret that in the future? Have you thought about what this is going to be like when Oliver is a teenager, when she has to explain to her friends why she has two mothers in such an unconventional story? I've thought about that, admitted Jane, and I think he's going to be the most understanding teenager in the world. He will understand that the perfect families are not those that follow social rules, but those that are formed with conscious love. They left Oliver's room and walked to the terrace overlooking the garden. The view from there included both the city lights and the small neighborhood where Jane had lived before, a constant reminder of the two worlds that were now part of one life. Do you know what's the strangest thing about all this? Arthur said, leaning on the railing. What? That I feel like I finally understand what the word home means? Before Oliver, before you, this house was just a place where I slept between family obligations and business responsibilities. And now it's the place where Oliver takes his first steps, where you sing lullabies that I had never heard, where my mother learns to knit to make toys for her grandson, where my father plans expansions of foundations instead of just increases in profits. Jane nodded. Home is not a place, it's where the people you love decide to create something together. Do you think Oliver will want to meet Camilla one day? It was a question they had avoided for months, but would eventually have to face. Camilla Harrington had completely disappeared after abandoning Oliver, and private investigators had failed to locate her. If you want to meet her, we will help you find her, Jane replied without hesitation. Oliver has the right to know his full story when he is ready. Aren't you afraid that might complicate things, Arthur? What scared me was that Oliver would grow up not knowing that he is loved. I don't have that fear anymore. No matter what happens in the future, this child knows that he has a family that would fight for him. At that moment, Penelope appeared on the terrace with a tea tray. I'm interrupting something important. Just planning for the future, Arthur replied. Ah, the future. Penelope served the tea with the elegant movements she had refined over decades of hosting social events. Do you know that I received a very interesting call yesterday? From whom? From the Society and Family magazine. Do you want to do an article about non-traditional families? Successful. Apparently our story has become somewhat famous in social work circles. Jane and Arthur exchanged glances. They had been careful to maintain privacy, but it was inevitable that their situation would generate curiosity. What did you tell them? Jane asked. I told them that I would consider it if the article focuses on the benefits for children, rather than in the sensationalism of our family arrangements. And if you want to interview us? Penelope smiled. I told them that they would have to talk to my grandson's joint guardian who makes the decisions about public exposure. It was another one of those moments that showed how they had completely redefined family hierarchies. Jane was no longer the employee who needed permission. She was the co-supervisor in all matters related to Oliver. I think, Jane said after considering the proposal, that we could help other families who are facing similar situations, but only if the approach is educational, not voyeuristic. Then I accept, Penelope said. I will coordinate with your editors. While Penelope returned to the house, Arthur and Jane stayed on the terrace enjoying the fresh evening air. Can you imagine, said Arthur, what would our lives have been like if it had never rained that night? It wouldn't have been our lives, Jane replied. They would have been completely different lives. You would have remained a father who didn't know he had a son. I would have remained a broken woman working to survive. Oliver didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what would have happened to Oliver. Sometimes I think it was all meant to be, Arthur muttered. Sometimes I think it was all a series of conscious decisions to choose love over convenience, Jane replied. And I like that version better. A small sound came from Oliver's room. Not crying, just the murmur of a baby stirring in his sleep. They both automatically headed towards the house, united by the parental instinct that they now completely shared. As they passed by Oliver's room, they stopped to watch him sleeping. He was 8 months old now, thick curly hair, chubby, well-fed baby cheeks, and that expression of absolute contentment that only children have, that they feel completely safe. Look what we did, whispered Jane. Look what he did for us, Arthur replied. And he was right. Oliver had not only found a family, he had created one. A family that proved that true love does not follow social rules, but writes its own rules based on compassion, commitment, and the conscious decision to choose a child's well-being over all other considerations. The maid who found a baby abandoned in the rain had become a mother, a mentor, and an agent of social change. The businessman who didn't know he had a son had become a father, a partner, and an advocate for non-traditional families. And the baby who almost died in a cardboard box had grown up to become the catalyst that transformed lives. He redefined an ancestral family and created a legacy of compassion that would extend far beyond their own lives. In the silence of that night, while Oliver slept surrounded by multiplied love, the story, which had begun with abandonment and despair, had become the most beautiful testimony that true families are built with decisions of the heart, not with accidents of biology, and everyone lived, not happily ever after, because real life is more complex than fairy tales, but consciously committed to choosing love day after day, decision after decision, until love became the strongest family tradition of all.